Well, now I get to move on to the next phase of my role here at the event, which is speaking on behalf of and emceeing, if you'd like, two of my friends and colleagues. I'm very fortunate to call both Kartik and Katy my friends. I believe they're, well, I mean, I wouldn't say this in front of 200 plus people if I didn't believe this. They're two of our most impactful scholars and people that have had an impact on both the way people think and the way that firms think. So it's my honor to introduce first my colleague Katy Milkman. Katy is the James G. Dinan Professor at the Wharton School. She's host of, and you have to listen to this if you have not, host of Charles Schwab's popular behavioral economics podcast, Choiceology, the former president of the International Society for Judgment and Decision Making, and she's also the co-founder and co-director of the Behavior Change for Good initiative, a research center at Penn with the mission of advancing the science of lasting behavior change. And last but not least, I don't know if this is last but not least, she's an author of a best-selling book that's just been recently released called How to Change the Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. So Katy, welcome to the WCA Teradata event.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The way I'm going to do things is I'm going to ask Katy a few questions, and then I'll turn things over to Kartik, but I might as well introduce Kartik Hosanagar as well. Kartik is a professor of technology and digital business here at the Wharton School, where he also serves as the faculty lead for Wharton's AI for Business initiative. It's actually one of our newest flagship initiatives within the analytics at Wharton umbrella. He was previously a founder of Yodel, where he helped bring algorithmic innovations to digital marketing. And I assume everybody in the world knows this now. He's currently a founder of JumpCut, where he's applying data science to decision making in Hollywood. You want to talk about something that's really cool. You all have to follow what they're doing at JumpCut. He's also an author of A Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence. So Kartik, welcome to the event as well.
Eric, thanks for having me.
So Katy, let me start with you. So you recently wrote, again, as I mentioned, a popular book called How to Change that shares insights from it's hard to believe because I feel like I've known you forever, but you seem like a junior person to me still, despite all of your accomplishments. Your decades of research on what it takes to change behavior for good. What's your biggest takeaway about what works to promote positive behavior change? Because all of us here are not only individuals and scholars, but we want to change behavior for good more generally.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway is that too often we're looking for a single answer and a silver bullet that comes readily off the shelf and is well tested by science, like set big audacious goals or something along those lines. And what we see time and again is that it really depends on the context and what the specific barriers to change are in that environment. So if people aren't visiting the gym regularly, for example, something that I sometimes study, it might be because they find the gym miserable. It might be because they haven't figured out a way to make time in their schedules for it. If someone isn't taking their medication, it might be because they're forgetting. And if you try to use the same solution to all those different kinds of problems, you actually don't end up doing very well. So that's sort of my biggest takeaway is it's super important to actually spend the time to understand what the barriers to change are and then apply the tools that science has proven can be effective in that context for that barrier.
So maybe as a follow-up to that, just within the same question and domain, I showed this 2x2 slide a little while ago of this idea of within versus between heterogeneity. I think what you're also suggesting is one blanket rule, even for a given individual, might not work depending on the context at which she or he is making some sort of decision. I'd love to get your reaction to that because, I'm trying to think about my 2x2 framework as, whether it's a hidden Markov model or people moving between these latent states. I'm trying to think just about how general that framework is, and I'd love your reaction to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, that for a given person probably faces different barriers to change in different contexts in their own lives. So in some settings, the reason that they aren't getting there is because they don't believe they can, they lack the confidence. And then you need a really different kind of solution in that setting. Maybe you're not confident, maybe women aren't as confident about science, technology, and math performance. That's a really different barrier, and they need really different interventions than if they're not going to the gym because they find it miserable. So we have to think a lot within person about variability as well as across people.
Maybe since I love your answer. So this is one of the things about being a moderator, our master of ceremonies. I get to ask any questions I want. So I'm not even moving on to question 2 yet. Let me still stay on this one. How much do I'll call it, I know because I follow all of your research. I love reading your papers. How much do the things that you've studied at the individual level, because many people here are thinking, I'd love to make memorable change or effective change at my firm. How much do the same principles that apply to individuals also apply to managers trying to have meaningful change? Maybe there's many people here saying, I'd love to make my company customer-centric, but I'll use myself as an example. I worked at DuPont for 5 years. You can't name a more product-centric company. So how do your principles that apply to people also potentially apply to managers or people in their companies?
Yeah, well, the good news is that people seem to be people across the board, whether they're in managerial roles, employee roles, customer roles, or thinking about how to improve themselves. And so most of the principles actually that I have written about as tools that people can use to achieve their own goals have primarily been tested in organizations where managers are trying to use those principles to help customers achieve more or change the behavior of customers in positive ways, or to help employees achieve more. And then so the applications are often the same, regardless of whether the goal is change employee behavior, individuals achieve their own goals, or change customer behavior. It's really the same things seem to work in all those contexts, as long as you understand what the barrier is. That diagnosis process is equally critical in all those settings.
Well, related to that, I know one of the things you've written about quite extensively is something you've called the fresh start effect. First of all, what is it? And how can companies use it to promote positive change?
Yeah, so the fresh start effect is something that I started studying after giving a talk at Google about a decade ago now, sharing some of my other research on nudges and tools we could use to change employee behavior for better. And I got this great question, which was, is there some ideal time to promote change if we're trying to encourage change among employees or change among customers? Are people more open to that kind of thing at certain points in time? And I actually realized that the academic literature had said very little about this, but it was immediately obvious to me that there was quite a lot that should be said. So along with Heng-Chen Dai, who's a former Wharton doctoral student, now a professor at UCLA.
I remember Heng-Chen. I remember your guys' presentation on this like it was yesterday. I was like, just keep going. I'm thinking back, and I was sitting there like, oh my God. But keep going.
I'm very proud of Heng-Chen and all that she has accomplished, and it was so fun to work with her on this. And Jason Reese, who's a Wharton senior fellow, we sort of teamed up and started thinking about how timing might affect change and how we would test that. And what we ended up finding across data set after data set is that there are these moments, and those moments when people are more open to change tend to come about when we feel like we have a fresh start in life. So there's a way we think about time. There's a whole literature on autobiographical memory that actually isn't completely linear. We think about our lives as if we're characters in a book, living through chapters. So you might, the college years, the years working at Teradata, the PhD years, the years living in Boston, whatever it might be. That's how you categorize time in those chapters. And when you feel like you have a chapter break and you're turning the page, you feel like you have a bit of a clean slate and a fresh start. And this is part of what drives New Year's resolutions, is that sense that, that was the old me last year that couldn't quit smoking or stick to my health goals, and the new me is going to be more capable because it's a new year. So we see this not only at the start of a new year, but these fresh starts arise at the start of a new week, a new month, following holidays that we associate with fresh starts. So think more the start of spring or Labor Day and less Valentine's Day. The celebration of a birthday is another moment that brings with it fresh start feelings. So people search more for the term diet on Google at these times. They're more likely to visit the gym. They're more likely to set goals on popular goal setting websites. And if we invite someone to start pursuing a goal, say save in a 401k, or do you want to start getting reminders about a goal you've set a while ago but haven't yet begun to pursue, and we just mention or highlight that a date is associated with a fresh start. We label at the start of spring instead of March 20th. We label at your birthday instead of, in 3 months, which happens to be when you have a birthday. People are more attracted to those moments, and they end up saving more, pursuing their goals more aggressively.
one of the things that is the natural for me, since I study customer lifetime value, churn modeling, and other things like that, is I wonder if people are less loyal because they see it as a fresh start on certain days, and whether people's actual transaction histories have these discrete jumps on certain days would be interesting to study.
Yeah, it's
Maybe
a great
just,
question. Heng Chen has actually done some work looking at how this relates to sort of resets in the way we track things. So, for instance, right, a sports team might track seasonal statistics, and then you sort of get a new season statistics, or a sales team might track your monthly sales or your quarterly sales, and then start again. And those refresh moments when you reset a counter or a tracker do seem to have a very similar effect to these special dates. So we can create a fresh start either on a calendar or with the way we track performance and behavior.
well, Katy, I'm going to jump to Kartik for a few minutes, and then I'll save some time for questions. Matter of fact, there's a great question that came in the chat for you, but I'll get to it maybe just at the end. So, Kartik, you obviously have spent your entire career in, I'll call it, similar to me, in the algorithms and data science space. I'm just going to go out and ask you the most basic of questions. How can algorithms and data science enable a shift towards customer-centric thinking?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there are many pieces to the puzzle. Katy talked about, culture, individual behavior, and incentives, but also to implement, customer-centric sort of approach at scale in digital environments. You really need algorithms, and in particular, recently, machine learning to be able to succeed at scale with it. You talked about, the need to embrace the idea of cross heterogeneity within heterogeneity, and to do that means providing different experiences to different people, and at different times based on their context. So your emails have to say different things to you versus me, to me when I'm in Boston versus when I'm in Seattle, or in the morning when I wake up versus the evening, all that stuff, right? The website has to do these different things. And to do this at scale, you have to rely on algorithms. So, algorithmic personalization, like we see on, say, Amazon or Netflix or YouTube and elsewhere. And they all embrace the ideas you mentioned. They do cross heterogeneity. They also do within heterogeneity. They're able to figure out. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment. One of the things you brought up, which everyone listening and participating in that WCI Teradata event should recognize, what you're saying, Kartik, is so important. If you don't have variation in X, meaning if you don't have within person change and cross person change, you could talk about estimating these things, but you don't actually have the variation in the data to do so. I think if you just elaborate a little bit more on that, 'cause I think that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think again, when I go to, I'll use Netflix, right, or YouTube. First, what Netflix, let's call it a store or page or whatever we want to call it, it looks so different for me versus you, and so they're acknowledging that we're two different people, and there's certainly enough of cross heterogeneity there. But also, there are contexts. There are times where I want to watch a comedy. There are times where I want to watch something serious. And so, and Amazon does this particularly well, where, initially it's cross heterogeneity, but I'll go in and I'll search for something, or I'll click on a product, and then it starts to change based on my context. And they know, okay, this guy, who usually is maybe buying a certain kind of products today, for some reason, Kartik is interested in something else. And YouTube, of course, does this brilliantly as well. And we've all experienced this. We go to watch one video on YouTube, and before you know, you've lost a couple hours because they were just so good at recognizing the context and providing that level of personalization.
And of course, you and I could, I was going to say, you and I could spend the rest of the next day talking to everybody about ARM Bandit solutions, which are intentional algorithms to actually let people sample these alternative choices.
Exactly. I mean, I think contextual bandits, any company that is implementing personalization at scale and implementing these ideas of cross and within heterogeneity, the go-to starting tool is a contextual bandit, where, you can incorporate certainly customer demographics, technographics, all the cross heterogeneity factors, but also their current context and what are they looking at right now and so on. And at the end of the day, we can talk about all these ideas of CLV and you can run models and find your segments, you can find your most profitable customers. But if you are talking about implementing anything at scale, you have to talk about how that translates into contextual bandits or recommender algorithms or these algorithms that are needed.
Well, let me jump to the question that I'm sure everyone is asking, wants me to ask you now, which is you've talked about to do stuff at scale, which most of our businesses, we need to do stuff at scale, require algorithms. What are the risks for moving to algorithmic, if you'd like, even automation?
Yeah, I mean, I think first there are the obvious data risks, right? When you're doing stuff and automating that process and it's based on data, data quality is a big one. Data privacy, of course, is a big one. There's that famous story of how Target exposed a teen pregnancy, which, that story is probably not true from everything I've read, but that story is indicative of the kinds of problems that can happen. When you have privacy risks. And certainly we see with Facebook the kind of pushback it has been facing in recent years because of privacy risks. There's then the risks associated with automated decisions. Bias is a really big one. And so if you have certain biases in the way humans have made decisions in the past, and then you use an ML system to learn from that and you automate that, you're institutionalizing that bias at that point, because now you have a system that might be discriminating against some group. There's, again, within the marketing context, just to pick one example, the Housing and Urban Development Authority sued Facebook because of, their targeting algorithms use things like race and religion to figure out who sees target housing ads and so on, right? So, and then beyond that, there's also, just like you have information security issues in traditional computing, you have machine learning security issues where people can attack your AI models, knowing that you're using AI and try and fool the model to learn spurious patterns. So there's no doubt there's tons of risks, but I think the opportunities are immense, and so it's all about having a governance structure in place while you're embracing all of the upside and the potential here.
So maybe in the 2 minutes we have left, I'll ask both Katy and Kartik. I'll start with Katy for a closing statement. If we were sitting here a year from now, and we will be sitting here a year from now at the 8th WCA Teradata event, what would you tell people you've been working on for the last year? Like, what's the most exciting thing you're working on now that you'd like people to know about? And then I'll ask the same question of Kartik.
I think the most exciting thing that I don't know that I'll have results yet. The most exciting thing I'm thinking about is a lot of my research on behavior change to date has been done sort of technology direct to a single individual, where we deliver a message or a series of messages or incentives to try to change behavior. And I think we're missing out on the power of social forces in a lot of the work we do to try to change behavior, because often behavior is changed in groups. If you think of the way religion changes behavior, the way that our college roommates change our behavior, the way our spouses change our behavior, it's not through a text message sent by an impersonal administrator. It is a relational experience. And so getting very excited about starting to develop some behavior change interventions that actually incorporate groups into the delivery of tools to help people change for the better when it comes to their health and their finances.
And just so you know, I want to do that for CLV too, because when you change the CLV of a given individual, it also has bleed over to other individuals around it. So this concept of group impact, direct and indirect effects is extraordinarily broad and interesting. How about you, Kartik? If we're sitting here in a year, besides Jump Cut, maybe it's something from Jump Cut, but what are you working on that everyone should know about?
Yeah, I'll use Jump Cut itself as an example. I'm on an interim leave from Wharton working on this venture, and we're trying to bring data science into Hollywood. I think everyone knows that Hollywood is notoriously like a gut and relationship driven industry. People make decisions based on who knows who, and there are consequences of that. The industry has a notoriously poor hit rate or success rate. And if you make decisions based on gut and relationships, the industry is not particularly inclusive either. And so we're trying to use data science to change that and to take unconventional bets and in fact, de-risk taking a bet on an underrepresented voice or making the industry more inclusive. And the interesting challenge there is once you say we're going to use data to justify bets that you're not making, the question is what data? Because historically, the industry has not made these
Right.
kinds of bets. So if you look at the past, you'll make more and more of the same kind of stuff. So there's sort of really interesting exploration, exploitation types of challenges. How do you explore and go into new areas, but at the same time know that it has to produce results? So there's huge impact societally, but also huge statistical and data science challenges there.
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of both Wharton and Teradata to thank Katy and Kartik for joining us and for this panel today. And we'll hope to see you at an event soon. But thank you again to Katy and Kartik for joining us today.
Thanks for having us. It was a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you.